a shockingly high Missouri-South Carolina betting line, but maybe it shouldn't be when you consider some metrics have South Carolina as the worst team in the league so far.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And, of course, got to talk more about LaNorris Sellers, the questionable quarterback for Sunday for the Gamecocks, for Saturday, I should say, against Missouri. All the people assuming that the betting line means that means Sellers is unlikely to play. Well, I would pump the brakes on that particular take. Plus, Missouri by the numbers so far this season, and a big player that Missouri absolutely has to avoid on Saturday if they are going to take care of business and win the Mayor's Cup once again. I will tell you quickly, today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first ticket purchase. And would you believe that South Carolina so far has performed like the worst team in the SEC? Yes, according to S&P Plus over at ESPN. Yes, true son Bill Conley puts together those numbers for us. Well, before you start being dismissive of those numbers, if you're a Missouri fan, well, they favor Missouri quite a bit. Missouri 23rd in the AP poll. How about 11th in S&P Plus? How does that sound for a projection moving forward? The Tigers have steadily moved up so far here the first few weeks because the Tigers have continued to outperform the expectations of said projections, by the way. And unsurprisingly, that means Missouri is 3-0 against the spread, not just 3-0 on the season. So that's going to tend to, make the projection systems like Missouri quite a bit. On the other hand, it wasn't just the brutal loss to Vanderbilt on Saturday night by South Carolina, but a relatively unimpressive performance against a Virginia Tech team that isn't all that impressive either. In fact, where are the Hokies ranked? I got to really keep scrolling down here to see where Virginia Tech is. Yes, 84th in the country, just one spot behind Northwestern and two spots behind Oklahoma State, who just lost by approximately 200 points in Eugene, Oregon, just to give you an idea of where Virginia Tech is right now. In fact, I'm betting my buddy Chris Marler over at Locked On Gamecocks is probably trolling Hokie Nation and Gamecock Nation as well, positing the idea, what if Shane Beamer maybe takes over Virginia Tech? Good job, Chris. Definitely get dem sweet clicks for sure. But the bottom line here is that, yes, according to S&P Plus, South Carolina 48th in the country so far. That's behind Kentucky. That's behind Mississippi State, and it's behind every other team in the SEC so far. So while 50th is not exactly, I should say 48th to be exact once again, if you're the 48th best team in the country, it's not exactly an impossibility that you go on the road and beat the 11th best team in the country, especially if your star quarterback is healthy for this ball game. So I don't want to make this out to be more than what it is. But I'll tell you this, 12.5 was the line yesterday. It's now creeping up to 13.5 over at FanDuel Sportsbook. I will say this to the people who say that, hey, this means that Vegas thinks Sellers is not going to play. I would say au contraire. I think this has much more to do with the projections right now, which these season-long projections, they don't factor in any individual injuries whatsoever. So this is simply based on how South Carolina has performed so far. Yes, most of that second half against Vanderbilt without LaNorris Sellers, but this is a big picture look at the Gamecocks, and so far it doesn't paint all that pretty of a picture. The Gamecocks really, when I've watched them, outside of their first drive against Vanderbilt, outside of their opening drive against Virginia Tech as well, that Gamecock offense just was not all that impressive. But as usual, the Gamecocks' special teams has been quite impressive, especially Vicari Swain, the return man for the Gamecocks, to the point where if you're Missouri, and I mean this quite literally, do not kick to Vicari Swain, especially and including if LaNorris Sellers is playing, but especially if he's not, and it's Luke Doty out there, the sixth-year quarterback. To me, you play defense, you play special teams, and keep the ball out of Vicari Swain's hand. Even if that means, well, you kick it out of bounds and that costs you 10, 15, 20 yards. That's actually not the worst result in the world. The worst result in the world, obviously, is Swain running back a touchdown on a punt in a close ball game that is sort of a nip and tuck defensive field position type of affair. That's the way you let South Carolina sneak out a victory at the Zoo if you're the Tigers. So, again, to that line, my thing was really, I'm almost surprised that FanDuel posted a line because LaNorris Sellers being, well, one of the most prominent players in the country, I would say, a quarterback, obviously, his presence is certainly worth a few points, maybe even up to a touchdown. I suppose we can discuss that. But I'm just a tiny bit surprised that there is even a line posted right now. Because I've seen people say, hey, I think Sellers will definitely play. Or the opposite. Well, there's no way Sellers is going to play based on this line. I'm just telling you, I don't know how anybody can make that statement right now. If indeed LaNorris Sellers suffered a concussion on Saturday, we need multiple days of him not having concussion symptoms to feel comfortable about playing him against Missouri. At least that's the way I'd feel about it if I were his training staff, if I were his father, whatever it might be, if I had his best interests and long-term interests at heart. Going a week out after suffering a concussion is a risky move. You want to really, really be sure that those concussion symptoms have cleared. And simply put, as we talk here on a Tuesday, I don't think we're going to know. And speaking of Chris Marler, by the way, was just texting back and forth with him. We were planning on recording our crossover this evening. We're going to push it back to Wednesday night because we're expecting to hear from South Carolina and Shane Beamer. Presumably we'll hear something about LaNorris Sellers, but again, I think unless he's just in a bad way and they're just absolutely certain that they're going to rule him out, I just don't really expect to hear anything new here. And even under those circumstances, Shane Beamer's pretty clear that he doesn't really talk about specific injuries, and he's already said, hey, we're optimistic about it. I don't think he's really going to give us a whole lot more than that. I think this is a thing. It's truly going to be a game time decision for LaNorris Sellers and South Carolina on Saturday night. I'll just tell you this from some experience, when I'm surprised by how large a line is, and I certainly was surprised by this one, the older I get, I realize, you know what, there's probably a reason for that. It's not just that, wow, I'm so brilliant and I can guess all of the lines with absolute perfection. No, I think back to Georgia and TCU, the national championship game from a few years ago, when I was stunned by how large Georgia was favored in said game. And you know what, I finally realized when I'm surprised by these, I think I'm going against my instincts here. And boy, I was right that night. Georgia wins it, covers the spread with absolute ease. 65-7, the Dogs won that particular game. I'm not saying Missouri's going to win 65-7, but I have to say, for all the people out there feeling the vibes of, oh, this big line scares me, from my experience, I'm actually feeling kind of the opposite way. If anything, I'm feeling like Missouri's going to have a relatively comfortable victory on Saturday. That's what this is making me think. And while 3 games may not seem like a big sample size, well, you're 25% of the way through the season in college football. This is indeed the sport of small sample sizes. So let's see what we can actually glean from some of the numbers moving forward. For instance, is Beau Pribula, is he the next Chase Daniel, or is he maybe closer to more of a souped-up Brady Cook? I don't know. Let's dive into all of it. Talk about Kevin Coleman, Brett Norfleet, the Missouri running backs, all coming up here in just a little bit. First, though, this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the daily fantasy app where making the right call can pay off. You and I make calls every day, but on PrizePicks, being right means cashing in. And with football back, PrizePicks is the simplest and fastest way to get in on the action. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections and turn your takes into real prizes, all in less than 60 seconds. For example, if you're kind of down on the Chiefs offense, but maybe you're still high on Patrick Mahomes, let's go less than Travis Kelce and Isaiah Pacheco's yardage totals, for example. That's just the type of take that I like to take and make money with it. Download the PrizePicks apps today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it is good to be right. So like the rest of the Missouri passing game, Beau Pribula has been really efficient so far, but not elite in terms of explosiveness, at least compared to the rest of the SEC. Now, some of that is due to the competition and the fact that, especially against, Louisiana and Central Arkansas, Missouri didn't really need to chuck the ball down the field. Again, especially in an insanely hot Louisiana game, Missouri seemed rather content to just run the thing off of the field. But despite relatively, again, maybe what I think we would expect based on, I think, what our eyes have told us so far on how Beau Pribula has played, compared to, again, this is comparing to the rest of the SEC here, relatively low yards per attempt, yards per completion, but just one interception so far, and again, just very efficient in terms of moving the football. A high completion percentage on a low depth of target, for example. So not throwing it all that far down the field. I'll just tell you, I think he's been better than what the numbers have even shown so far. And speaking of guys who have been really good on the numbers, the numbers definitely back up how good Ahmad Hardy has been so far. Not only is he the SEC and the nation's leading rusher in terms of just rushing yards total, everything else backs it up too. Hardy leads in yards after contact, average, and total yards after contact, by the way. That second one, the total yards after contact, leads by well over 100 yards over the second guy in the SEC, who happens to be, yes, you guessed it, Kewan Lacey, former Missouri Tiger. He was a true freshman with Mizzou last season, now with Ole Miss. And really all the numbers say Lacey has probably been the second best back in the conference after Ahmad Hardy, in my humble opinion. The numbers also bear out that Jamal Roberts has been a plus absolutely as well, but I have to say this, Hardy has been elite, especially in the SEC. Also, Marquise Davis right there with Hardy and Lacey, by the way, in terms of broken tackle percentage. So Davis, man, really a kind of an embarrassment of riches in the Missouri running back room right now. Some very, very encouraging early returns from the Missouri running backs. Obviously, Kevin Coleman, the early returns have been tremendous on him as well. You can't even, the clutch factor on his catches against Kansas, for example, isn't even factored in here. But Coleman has caught 89% of his targets. So whenever Missouri throws the ball Kevin Coleman's way, nearly 9 out of 10 times, he's caught it so far for a completion. That's easily the best in the conference among guys who have at least 20 targets. For example, Oklahoma's Deion Burks, he's second place, nearly 20% behind at 70%. So what an unbelievable hookup Pribula and Coleman have been so far. By the way, Brett Norfleet, not too far behind either, 78%. Many more of his, though, have been wide open. That's for darn sure. Coleman has really been good on contested catches. By the way, that average depth of target, which I said was relatively low for Missouri and Beau Pribula overall, well, not for Marquise Johnson, as you might expect, although Marquise, to me, has looked like more of a complete receiver here early so far. Still number one in the SEC by a good bit. 19 yards is his average depth per target so far, on just 14 targets, by the way, but still, that is leading the SEC by quite a bit. So whenever Missouri is looking Marquise Johnson's way, generally they're still chucking it pretty far down the field. Norfleet, by the way, I question this a little bit, credited with 3 drops on the season. That really seems like a lot to me. But by the way, 18-year-old Alabama receiver Ryan Williams leads the league with 4. Coleman has 1. No others on the Missouri roster. No one else on the Missouri roster is credited with any drops so far on the season. So some of those drop numbers sometimes I have to question a little bit, but overall just a lot of really encouraging numbers there if you're a Missouri fan. Now, as far as actual play concepts go so far, well, Missouri ran a ton of outside zone this past week against Louisiana, but overall, actually, on the season, Missouri has run inside power and inside zone read more often than outside zone. I think that's a bit of a change from previous seasons, but what hasn't changed, the Missouri favorite passing concept, at least according to SEC StatCat. Yes, the flood variations. I think for the third year here under Kirby Moore, this is definitely some variation of the flood concept is definitely something that he always is his number one thing. Now, as far as other passing concepts, we'll go in order here. Screens, slant variations, check down / clear out / HB option / Texas. In other words, throwing the ball to the running back. And then finally, we've got shot variations and all verts in order there. So those are 2 obvious chunk type of plays there. So everything there is basically the dink, and then finally you've got the chunk there down at the very end. So the dink and the chunk very much alive for Missouri. Just shows that, especially thus far, you're getting a lot more dink than the chunk when, especially against Louisiana, Missouri didn't really need all that much chunk. By the way, coming up, I do have the kickoff time and TV information for homecoming coming up for you in just a little bit. And also, Eli Drinkwitz had a challenge for the Missouri fan base this week. Well, you know what? I got a challenge for Eli Drinkwitz of my own. So let's talk about that here in just a minute. But college football is back, and I couldn't be more excited, of course, for the South Carolina game this week. And, of course, if you're looking for tickets at the last minute to Missouri and South Carolina, well, Gametime is the best place to be. Zone deals, that's my favorite personally. Pick the section. Gametime picks the seats for you, and you save big money. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go, download Gametime today. And quickly, in case you missed it, 6 o'clock kickoff on ESPN for South Carolina on Saturday. No college game day, obviously, after, well, South Carolina got thrashed by a pretty good Vanderbilt team, by the way. Homecoming, 6:30 kickoff, so a night game. We'll have plenty of time for tailgating for that one. ESPNU is the television, so no streaming confusion for those of you out there. Again, 6:30 kickoff for homecoming and UMass. By the way, the South Carolina game this morning officially sold out after a day or two ago. Well, Eli Drinkwitz seemed maybe a tiny bit annoyed that the South Carolina game had not officially sold out yet. He said, quote, "I would challenge our fan base. The South Carolina game is not a sellout yet. So what are we waiting on? That's an SEC game. It needs to be much more rowdy and much more raucous than the Kansas game. This is the SEC. You have a really good football team. We need everybody to show up, be early, be loud, and take it to another level because we know it's there. Well, here's the thing, Eli. If we weren't quite as rowdy and raucous during the KU game as maybe we would have all liked, you would have liked, I got to be honest, there's a pretty good reason for that. 14 years after this game came back, Missouri's nearly a touchdown favorite, and then they're trailing the ball game 21-6 in the first quarter. And then, yes, Missouri, with just a few minutes left in the ball game, was trailing there as well. Despite the 11-point victory, hey, the Jamal Roberts long touchdown there was a nice cherry on top of the sundae. But I'm sorry, that what I just described there, that's going to make any Missouri fan a little bit nervous and puckered up a little bit. I'll speak for myself. That's how I felt for basically 90% of the game. So forgive me for being a tiny bit nervous throughout that game. I'll try to bring more liquor in next time, I suppose. I don't know. That was my fault for being sober during a Missouri-Kansas game, obviously. But in all seriousness, though, I do think it's a bit of a mistake by Eli Drinkwitz to, especially for a game that was clearly going to sell out anyway. I mean, why does he need to burn some sort of political capital, to steal a phrase from the news side? Why burn sort of any goodwill with Missouri fans sort of wagging your finger at them saying, hey, we need to get out there and sell this game out, when clearly the game was probably going to sell out anyway, which it ultimately did. I just think, I don't know, I'm just turned off a tiny bit when anytime in a world where not only are ticket prices going up every single year, if you're an individual ticket purchaser, a season ticket holder, like myself and my family have been for decades. Hey, just keep paying more, by the way. And also, hey, NIL, we need you to throw down for that too. And by the way, parking's going to be more. And the north end zone, that's going to cause prices to go up. And by the way, make sure you come to every single game no matter what. And at a certain point, it just feels like we're not the customers and we're just, this class of people that is to be wringed out of every dollar possible. I don't know. To me, I understand that at a certain point, of course, Eli Drinkwitz is right. It's the SEC when we do have a really good football team, by the way. This team does deserve to have a full crowd. There's no doubt about it. But the thing was, I just wish Drinkwitz would have maybe read the tea leaves a little bit there and said, all right, this game is going to ultimately sell out. And here's the thing. If you want sellouts, then lower the ticket prices. If you charge half the price, I guarantee you they'll sell out faster. So there's a real balance there. In fact, there's an argument to be made that if your tickets sell out the second that you put them on the market, well, you price them too low. So if you're Missouri and you want to get every bit of revenue you can out of the live gate, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, I'm just saying if you're going to do that, that means it's going to take longer to sell those tickets. This is basic Econ 101 here. And in fact, I'd actually give Missouri a lot of credit here, the athletic department, considering it's a new building as far as capacity goes, 57,000 this year. If it took them to the last week or the last few days to sell the last remaining tickets there, then I think actually Missouri did a pretty great job of pricing those tickets and getting the most revenue they possibly could out of it. So I would just say to Eli, here's my challenge for you, Eli. Just save those challenges for when they really matter, because on this one, I don't think you needed it. I think we were going to get there eventually. And actually, the fact that it took a little bit longer for this game to sell out, that's actually, weirdly, I think it's a good sign. It shows that, well, obviously your fans are into this enough to sell out the game, but at the same time, you didn't underprice the market so much that the tickets were gone the second they went on sale. There's a real balance there, and honestly, applause to your ticket department for finding it this week. Call this a win. There's no reason to be calling out Missouri fans. That's just my opinion. But hey, whatever your opinion is, you can always let me know everywhere on social media at Locked On Mizzou. And of course, email me LockedOnMizzou@gmail.com as well. And by the way, another big moment for Locked On college football fans. Locked On and Fire TV present College Football Kickoff with Jesse Holley, with former two-time AP Coach of the Year Gary Patterson. It's a college football preview only Locked On can do. Catch College Football Kickoff every Thursday throughout the season, only on Fire TV. And until next time, I'm John Miller. This has been Locked On Mizzou.